Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying your Wednesday today. I'm really excited to be going live today to talk about a topic that is actually on a lot of people's minds at the moment, and that is how can women powerfully negotiate their compensation? And I have a special guest with me, Jillian Climie, and Jillian is the co-founder of the Thought Co. She has spent her career advising and leading teams in executive compensation and corporate governance. And before launching the Thoughtful Co., Jillian led Lululemon's global equity compensation and executive compensation programs. After taking a career pause, she realized she wanted to more of three things in her professional life: thoroughness, passion, and freedom. I love that. And she co-founded the Thought Co to leverage her niche and technical experience, coupled with her passion for gender equity, to empower women to get paid what they deserve. And Jillian, this is a really important topic, and it's a topic that I am super passionate about as well, because I think there's, and we'll get into it a little bit, there's number of models of compensation that don't just evolve around the money. And a lot of things have changed, especially for the women in the W North community. A lot of the women in the W North community are women in leadership, and it has been a shifting couple of years. And so I think right now it's a really timely conversation for us to get stuck into with regards to compensation. What am I getting compensated in my current role? Is it in line with what the industry standards are? How can I make the environment that I'm in more in line with my goals and objectives? Because I think the Great Resignation was this thing, but at the end of the day, there are a lot of people that I speak to in W North that really do love their job and really do love their work. And with the shifting, all the shifting changes in the work world, we do have to actually stand up for ourselves, and we have to have the tough conversations and say, the prices have gone up. I have contributed more in the last 2 years, all of these things. So I'm really excited to get stuck into that with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here today. And I love how you brought up, compensation is not just base salary. It's also annual bonus, equity, but even more than that, it's, role scope, it's structure, it's flexible work arrangements, parental leave policies. Like there's so much more in compensation packages now that are negotiable and can make work for your whole life. So I really like how you kind of brought it up in that holistic way, because I totally agree. Part of it is getting the money you deserve, but also making sure work is really working for you.
100%. So let's get stuck in to my first question around compensation and how it works. I'd love for you to share a little bit from your experience at Lululemon and other companies that you've worked at. What determines the number that you're offered in a new job or promotion? Where's the starting point?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think a lot of women I work really focus with just on base salary and market data. How does market data impact that base salary? And market data is definitely a big input into compensation decisions, but there's so many other pieces that really come into play. So one is experience. How much experience do you have in the role? How much experience do you have in that industry? Level definitely impacts as well. If you're a director or a VP, you're going to be paid a little bit differently. Time at your company can sometimes matter as well. Some companies really prioritize tenure and longevity and will pay more for that. Other companies don't care about that at all. So that's an interesting one. Talent pipeline is another one. Are there 5 people who can do your job in the company, or are you the only person who can do it?
No, that's an interesting one I haven't heard before.
Yeah, definitely. Just role scarcity, especially within the Great Resignation, it is causing some premiums in certain roles. And a really interesting one is importance of the function to the business strategy. So, for example, if you're a software engineer at Microsoft, you're likely going to be paid a premium because that role is essential to Microsoft's business strategy. But if you're a software engineer at a big bank, let's say, you might not be paid a premium for that role, whereas a financial analyst might be paid that premium. So each company has a different strategy, of course, and within that, they have a different compensation philosophy, which governs kind of how they pay their people, or they should at least. Most companies do have that. And so it can be really different within industries, of course, but also within specific companies. So it's really important to, if you are negotiating for more compensation, not to just focus on market data, but also understand that there's all these other pieces that they're coming into play to make that decision. And that can show just kind of maturity when you're bringing up your ask.
No, that's a great point. And one of the things that has been an observation for me over the last few years is really in reflective of what you said with regards to the importance of the bottom line of that company. Is we talk a lot in W North about progression to C-suite, and what is that path to C-suite? And there are definitely divisions, and there are maybe non-P&L functions or other. Let's use I speak a lot to event planners as an example, and like how does somebody in the internal events and marketing realm move through to C-suite? So it's interesting what you say with regards to pay and compensation. It also does factor into your ability to path to C-suite if you're in the finance department, for example, or if you are a financial analyst for a bank. So it's all sort of intertwined, not just in the compensation that you will get in this current role, but what you could potentially see down the line.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think a big piece that I like to support women with in negotiating is being really confident and able to articulate your unique value to an employer. So what is it about you that no one else can do? And I promise you there's something, there always is. You can ask other people if you can't think of it. And that's great, just a great piece to have going into a negotiation. So you feel really confident about what you're asking for, and then it's really persuasive. But that's also such a great thing to have when you're trying to get into the C-suite, and being able to confidently articulate what you can do, which I think doesn't come naturally to women because we're not taught to do that. But it's so important to build that skill. And it's kind of like, what is your own personal value proposition? And it's essential. If you want to move up, you do have to advocate for yourself.
Definitely. And, when we talk about compensation, we brought this up at the very beginning, compensation is not always just the number and not always just the salary. So let's talk a little bit about overall compensation and benefits and what that could look like. What are you seeing out in the marketplace right now with regards to benefits and things that are really hitting home with women? Like we see things like the show us your leave, hashtag show us your leave, where companies are fighting over, like who's got the best parental leave and all of that. So I'd love to get your perspective on what you're seeing out there.
Yeah, I think that was so amazing too, because when has that happened in history before?
That businesses are competing over who's got the breath. It's one of my favorites. Just for those of you who might be tuning in, the Skim back in January challenged and put out a social media. It actually went pretty viral on, I'd say, LinkedIn more than anything, but the other social platforms as well. And the hashtag show us your leave was companies coming out and being very forthright with their parental leave policies. You even saw fertility benefits, things like that. So check that hashtag out if you're interested in learning more. But yeah, back to you, Jillian.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting time with the Great Resignation, and seeing companies are super stressed about retaining and attracting talent. And I know we're in a weird period where we may potentially be entering a recession, but I have not seen that change. Like the labor market is still super tight. So we're seeing companies float all the stops for employees now, which is amazing. So, I mean, especially in tech, like you'll have professional development allowances, mental health allowances, sometimes working out allowances, flexible work schedules, long-term saving programs like RSP with an employer match, ESPP programs, which enables you to participate in equity at a lower rate. Flexible role scopes, like you're having more autonomy about what you might want to include in your role or what you might not want to include, and team structure and all that kind of stuff. So there's so much more on the table right now. Vacation is also one that I think just as a society, we're finally acknowledging that, we're pretty burnt out collectively. So vacation is much more negotiable right now because I think employers really are realizing people need more time off, especially after going through 2 years of a pandemic and many other things happening in the world. So a lot more things that are negotiable. And one piece that I really like to bring up, and I could talk about all day, is equity compensation. So stock options, RSUs, PSUs, share appreciation rights, et cetera. Such important tools, especially as you get more senior in your career, where they are complex and can be really tough to understand and are not usually explained well within organizations. But take the time to really understand them, leverage resources or advisors if you need, because that's a place where it's often quite negotiable, especially with sign-on awards, and can really impact your long-term wealth. Definitely a bit more risk there because it is tied to share price, but it can create so much potential wealth over the long term. So that's a place where I love educating women on, how they work and where you can really push, because it can have big impact.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think that, let's talk a little bit about the flexibility of work because, 10 years ago, we saw a lot of women leave the workforce because, it was a very rigid line of 40 hours, 50 hours in the office. You can't, you can't sort of stray from that, or else you might be, alienated in your office. And so we had a lot of women move to either entrepreneurship or consulting. And I've actually notably, and I think it's also reflective of, the challenges in entrepreneurship during the pandemic, but I've seen a shift of a lot of those people going back into full-time employment because there are changes to work patterns. There's the ability to job share now. There's the ability to work a professional role for 3 or 4 days a week as opposed to just 5. So I'd love to get your perspective on that. And, from some of the large global companies you're working on, what you're seeing in kind of the flexible work and how they affect women right now.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing more flexibility than I ever have. And I've been doing this 8 or 9 years, I guess now. And it's kind of opening up. And I think we're also at the stage where as an executive, you have to own your own schedule. You have to operate very autonomously and you have to make your life work within work. And it's now, I think the pandemic, there was a bit of a blend of, everything coming together and we all went to work from home. And so now when we're starting to come back, we realize we need to set our own schedules and we are more efficient that way. And we operate better and we create better financial results for almost, most companies that had working from home. So I think companies are recognizing that, definitely more open to it. And to recruit and retain the best talent, they need to account for that. There's been a few companies like Tesla and a couple other big names that are saying 100% in the office work policy. But I think they might now be backtracking on that a little bit. But it's really tough. If you want the best people, you have to offer flexibility. And so don't be nervous when you're negotiating to say, I need to work from home every Friday so I can be efficient on that day and not have work take over my weekend or whatever it might be for you. Even with some companies who are saying they do want in work most of the week, I'm still seeing flexibility within those. So it's a great time to be figuring out exactly what you want and really articulating that and negotiating for it.
I agree. I definitely think, there's, in some cases, it does take a little longer to find that perfect fit with regards to being aligned on what you would like to see your ideal in office versus remote. But there, you as an employee, you've got choices at the moment for sure. So I want to talk a little bit about compensation bias. Can you share a little bit more on what that means and how women can work around it?
Yeah, I think the biggest bias that I see when women are negotiating that really comes into play is the likability bias. So we are expected to be nice and agreeable and communal in the workplace to be liked, and that impacts how our performance is assessed. But then we're also supposed to be assertive, to be seen as a leader and competent. So we're constantly balancing these two demands already, and then we throw negotiation into the mix. And a lot of women just choose not to negotiate because they don't want to tip that balance to too aggressive or too assertive. And when I first started doing consulting women on my own, I was shocked with how many women have never negotiated before in their career. But I think it's because we have subconsciously internalized some of these biases, and we're just, we don't want to rock the boat. So I do think that's one of the biggest ones that impact us, and I see it real time, daily. But something I love to support women with is making sure they know that a negotiation doesn't have to be a big negative, aggressive thing. You can negotiate in a really positive way and still confidently and directly ask for what you want and get it. So we can, acknowledge these biases, which I think is important, and still work around them and still get the money that we deserve. And there's a bit of framing to it. Like I do negotiation scripts for women, which helps just set up so they feel really confident in what they're asking for and that it's not overly aggressive, but still directly and confidently asking for that number that you want. We can work around these. And another bias I'll just mention, which is one that I found out about when I first started doing this work, is women, even when we do get the courage to negotiate, we expect and ask for lower compensation than men do. So, if you're really worried about asking for X amount of compensation, maybe push yourself a little bit more, because it's probably a bit lower than what your male counterpart might be asking for.
Totally. And another bias that I have been talking a lot about is proximity bias. Proximity bias is, as an example, and maybe it was more prevalent, but it's definitely still prevalent, but pre-pandemic, I was in a situation where I was a remote employee on an entirely in-person event team. And so I always felt like I was that lone wolf that wasn't at the office. And a lot of people who are the one person on a team that maybe chooses to work remotely as a part of a team that is mostly in office, they feel and sometimes experience a disadvantage from not being in the office every day. And that can contribute to like overall compensation, ability to get promoted, ability to be considered for special projects, which would eventually set them up for, their succession planning. So it's definitely something that I don't know if you have any feedback on proximity bias and how to combat it, but it's something I'm seeing a lot of.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. And there was an article that the CEO of Laurentian Bank, I think, wrote, who's a woman. And it was on how, remote work is actually, in many ways, it's good for women, which we often read about, but it also can be detrimental for women in the workforce because we're often the ones not coming in. And that face time can be really important, especially when you're at the executive level. So I think, some of the big companies that I've worked with are acknowledging this and know that you do need to schedule certain, in FaceTime, in-person time, especially for executive teams, and also being really clear about what the expectations are. And so it's not just, the men who are in the office and the women who are not, because that can be really detrimental. But I do think at the smaller organizations, who maybe are not setting super structured remote policies, it definitely is a bit concerning. And I think just getting really clear with your employer on when do people actually come into the office, and what is the expectation for you at your level, and seeing if that works for you. And yeah, it's definitely, it's like a double-edged sword. On one end, it's great because you can make your life work, but the proximity is important and does definitely have an impact.
100%. So one of the things that I'm seeing and hearing a lot of from some of the women in our community is, how when I'm already in the company that I love, can I negotiate myself up to sort of market standard? Because what's happening in this, fight for labor is a lot of people are getting hired in at much higher rates than people have previously negotiated. And in some large organizations, there's really a rigid structure of like how much you can actually jump in your compensation. What advice would you have for somebody, maybe it's a large organization who is sort of stuck in this, this model where they can't leap forward and catch up with the new hires, and they don't want to leave, but leaving and coming back or leaving to another company is the only way they are seeing to get more compensation? What advice would you have?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I read something that it's the loyalty tax now for staying. You're almost paying a tax for not going to another company and getting that increase. And yeah, I have two thoughts. I think one is being open and honest, like just even how you framed it, how you love this company and you want to stay here, but you're just feeling like you're not keeping up to pace with market. And so just being open and honest about that conversation, I think is so important right now. And so many employers are actively thinking about this and know it exists. So your manager in that case can be open and honest about what budget they're getting, what budget they may have, what flexibility they have in the situation. So I think that's a great place to start. And then one other thing I would say is I'm seeing, a lot of women come to me and say, inflation's crazy. I tried to ask for money because of inflation and I didn't get it. And the one thing about that is inflation is impacting everyone right now. So if you're bringing up inflation or, extreme market pressures, whatever it might be, you're really negotiating for everyone in your company, not yourself. So if you're bringing up and ask for more money, get really concrete and clear on your unique value prop, like I said, and key metrics of things that you have done over the past year. So like really crisp, maybe it's you've brought in 5 clients in the past year, or you've increased revenue or whatever it is to X dollars. Like really nail down those things you've done over the past year or two, which are probably, incredible in a lot of cases. Every client I work with, I'm blown away about how much value they add, and frame your ask around that. And that's so persuasive. So it's like, it's not, companies know all these things are happening, but how can you show your unique value in all the things you've done over the past year, and really demonstrate that? And that's so powerful because those are facts about your performance. And in that case, it's really hard for a manager to kind of turn that down, where it's easier to say, inflation, we're just not dealing with this right now, or market, we're waiting. But if it's a specific to you, it's really hard to kind of turn that down.
That's a very good point. I love what you said about like you're negotiating for everyone else. And we all know that at each year, there's only so many salary increases. And at the end of the day, stand up for yourself and prove
exactly.
your own individual worth. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
We are almost out of time, but I just wanted to ask the question, if anyone wants to learn more about the Thoughtful Co., like, can you share a little bit about your company, your services, and what you are working on at the moment?
Yeah, definitely. So we, the Thoughtful Co. does 2 things. One is we support women in negotiating, which is what I'm talking about today. So everything from one-on-one prep sessions to employment contract review to negotiation scripts to financial modeling, equity compensation, or executive peer analysis for more higher level women. So that's something we love doing and would love to support with. And then we also advise employers on implementing more equitable policies in their workplace that work for women. So we kind of come at it from 2 angles, knowing that it's also on the employer's responsibility to make things work as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can find more info at www.thethoughtfulco.net. And we're on LinkedIn and Instagram. And yeah, if you have any questions about what we do, we'd love to hear from you.
Perfect. And I love what you say also, like from the employer perspective, because many of the women in W North are managers, and they're on the other side of this in terms of trying to keep their good employees and keeping them happy, while also managing the bottom line of all of the things. So
it's tough. It's really tough.
Yeah, exactly.
Both sides. Yeah, it's hard.
Exactly. You're negotiating for yourself. You're negotiating for your team.
Yeah.
All of the things. So for those of you who tuned in and you haven't heard of W North is a membership and annual conference that elevates women to the C-suite. And we are really focusing on giving women the tools to advance their leadership. We have a membership that we are actually closing the doors of for intake and moving to a wait list as of July 18th and reopening shortly, but our prices are going up. So if you're interested in joining the community and joining over 1,000 members across Canada and the US, then please visit our website, wnorthconnect.com. And Jillian, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. Very timely. Mm-hmm. And I think that we will probably, maybe revisit a conversation like this in a couple months because it may look a little different. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really good to chat.
Thank you. Have a good one. Thanks. Bye, everyone.